Oh. Somehow. So I lost. Somehow I lost you from my computer there. I've got you back though, so that's okay. Right. Open your hands together. Tapping on over your face. Over your head and neck. Down to one shoulder. And your arm. The other side. After your chest. Belly. And then under your legs. Okay, so sit back and as always, following a familiar routine, familiar sort of pattern, and yes, the conversation we were just having. These remain uncertain times, and I don't think anybody really can predict what's happening. And that can be very unsettling for us in many ways. But we start to feel the benefit of these routines and patterns that we build up in our Tai Chi. Coming back to something familiar, something, if you like, predictable, something that we can just sort of engage with fully without too much sort of straining. Has an effect, I suppose the term I would use is centering, but there's many ways of describing it. But the familiar feeling is like your weight sinking back, that feeling of settling into the chair, the changes in your breathing and elsewhere in your body as you go through that process. The settling of your thoughts that comes with that. These are all real things that are really right at the heart of the benefits of the practice of Tai Chi and Qigong. And then the things that we, in a way, almost instinctively recognize when we start doing Tai Chi, they're the things that at the start of every session we remind ourselves about, because they are the foundation for the art. So your weight sinking down, some of the tightness and stiffness that you may feel in your body beginning to drain away a little. And that settling in your thoughts, so that in both mind and body there's a little bit of space, a bit of respite from the sort of activities around us. And then bringing the feet in, coming to the upright position, going through the same process again. It's always something that we want to give some time to. Knowing what we're looking for sort of makes it a smoother journey, and to an extent a quicker journey. But it is good to take that time. I'm often reminded of a poem that they used to read us when I was at primary school by W.H. Davis, starting with the lines, "What is this world if full of care? We have no time to stand and stare." And just that sense of Tai Chi seems to me to be an art that gives us that ability to stand and stare a little bit. So turning your head. It's characteristic of Tai Chi that the simplest of movements like this one can sometimes be quite revealing. We can notice things about what is really an everyday movement, simply turning your head, but in that space that you get in your mind, you begin to really appreciate, I suppose in a way, the sort of complexity of the body, just what's involved in the simplest of movements. And then your shoulders. Going forwards. And see if you can get a sense and appreciation, not just for, if you like, the mechanics of the movement, but the movement itself, this sense of the flow, the energy that begins to build with the movement. And then hands down to your sides, winding around. And through a combination of correct movement and posture and different aspects of mind, we actually encourage, develop that flow of movement, that flow of energy. Bring your hands up, trying to find ways to move, to sit and to stand without creating tightening, blockage that will interrupt that flow of movement. Trying to find ways to release those areas that are tight through changing how we move, how we're sitting, maybe using different images to help the flow go back the other way. And that harmonization, that balancing of that internal flow will be one of the principal aims of Chinese medicine. So if you go to an acupuncturist, they use needles in certain points of the body to help to release those blockages, to improve the flow of the energy. We're doing the same thing through the movements. Rest your hands. Easing forwards and push back. Sometimes getting that sense of a release can be as simple as just bringing your attention to an area of stiffness. And especially as you get more familiar with Tai Chi and it becomes a regular practice, just reminding yourself that that's how you want things to feel can be sufficient. Other times we might want to be a little bit more analytical about how we're doing the movement and our posture, or we might want to bring an image to bear. It's depending on what's going on. We can use different types of imagery. One very simple one I always find is to think of that flow as being like water flowing over a rock, so that areas that are tighter gradually eroded away. But there's all sorts of different types of images, as you know, as we go through the movements. You have effects on the mind and on the body and on the combination. And then turning slightly. And then in the other direction. And around. And back the other way. So for instance, with this exercise, one of the images I sometimes get for that quality of the movement is if you've got a glass, especially something like a wine glass or something like that, and we're just swirling the liquid around in the glass. That's the kind of feeling that we want to try and be aware of within our upper body. Coming back to this more central position and step out. I'm talking about these three elements, the mechanics, the body itself, the movement and the mind, though they're entirely separate. But in fact, they're not. There's a Tai Chi works in that area where those different elements overlap and blend, they influence each other. And then on the other side. And bring your feet back. Give yourself a moment to settle in. Let your hands drop down, and then push them past the neck. Body tilting, your upper body tilting forwards and backwards, your weight moving from hips to feet and back. Your arms feeling a slight pull as your shoulders go forwards and backwards, so your arms and your hands following the movement. So establishing in this very simple seeming exercise the whole kind of range of the chain of movement, the quality of the movement, the way that we move, that we're looking to maintain through all the different exercises. Of course, the more complex the exercise, the trickier that is. So it's good to start off with something that, if you like, kind of sets the scene at the beginning. And then there's a ball in front of you, rolling the ball in. And then, so the ball's expanding now, pushing your arms apart and then press in as you go forwards. But the name of the movement is actually Pigeon Spreads Its Wings. So an alternative image, perhaps. None of these images should be seen as being instructions. We use the imagery as it seems appropriate to us. Not every image will work for you. Sometimes the names and the images can help us recall the movement. Sometimes it's the other way around. If it suits you to try working with your breathing a little bit, see how it feels when you go back and your arms draw apart. See how it feels to take a breath in. Because sometimes we get that sort of opening all the way down through the front of the body. That means that the in-breath starts to feel quite natural in some cases. If it doesn't feel comfortable, if you have to force it somehow, then forget about it. Focus on something different to do with the movement. Let your breathing come naturally. And then pushing a wave. You may find that different exercises highlight and maybe even help to release particular areas that are tight. So after a while, we get to recognize, for instance, an exercise that might be good for releasing our back or a shoulder or something like that. Again, those things shouldn't be seen as being fixed. It's not like going to the chemist and picking up a prescription. And that's partly, again, because our minds are such a key part in this. And so, just like the movements itself, we need to keep a kind of fluid attitude towards these movements. And then hands fisted. And then turning out. Hands dropping down slightly as you wind them around, because that's quite a strong rotation in the shoulders. Bringing your hands in, so you're cradling the ball, pushing up. With your back lengthen and then contract, sort of pulling your arms down. So, as I said, this is like lifting the ball, but going downwards. Imagine you're in water and your hands are draped over the ball and you're trying to press the ball down into the water. So there's a a little bit of resistance there. A kind of soft resistance, and that encourages this feeling of movement in our back and our ribs, connecting with the arms. So you're not so much pressing downwards as you are dropping down and pulling the arms after you. And then hands out to the sides. Wild goose. And then parting the clouds. Listen, your hands drop down. Dragon plucks the stars from the sky. And again, we want to try, if possible, to develop that stronger quality, more connected quality within our body by imagining a resistance to the movement in one way or another. It's never a resistance that should cause us to strain. So the classic image is always as though you're moving through water, but it's by no means the only image. And it isn't even necessarily the best image. I don't think it's necessarily the best one for this exercise. If you imagine that your fingers are stuck in mud and you're sort of pulling your fingers out. And then here, if you were plucking an apple and it was sticking to the branch, you'd want to pull down a little bit, but you wouldn't grip tightly or anything like that. So that's one or two possible images. Another one I sometimes use is that I imagine that there's an elastic band fixed to the floor. And what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to stretch that elastic band out here. And then coming down, I don't want it just to snap shut. I want it to be a controlled, slow contraction. So if you use that image, after a while, if it's working for you, imagine that the elastic band is inside your body, going down through the leg, up through the side, and your ribs and so on. So you begin to feel those movements working from the inside out rather than the other way around. One more of these. and then changing. This time, adding the turn. Again, imagine stretching out an elastic band or pushing against water. You'll find that your responsiveness to different images improves. It's a very natural thing for our bodies and our physical bodies to respond to images in our minds one way or another. We notice that at no other time, perhaps when we're subjected to adverts, which use a great deal of imagery and ideas to promote a physical response. But it's a quality that we definitely actively work with and cultivate in Tai Chi. And then changing to scooping the sea and looking at the sky. And from this, almost a reversal of this movement, going into grasping the tiger's ears. One more time. And then switch over. And once again, change into grasping the tiger's ears. One more time. And then it's useful to just think a little bit about this, if you like, interaction of mind and body and movement. We know that as animals, our bodies respond to all sorts of things that we might not think of as being physical. It might be more to do with the mind. You know, Pavlov discovered that by ringing a bell, he could make dogs salivate, and so on and so forth. And you know, we respond to memories, we respond to images, to what people say, and so on and so forth. We often get a physical response to what you might call a mental stimulus or an emotional stimulus. That tends to be quite small. That tends to act very subtly on our body. And it's those very subtle changes within the body that are also, if you like, the building blocks, the bricks and mortar that make up the movements in Tai Chi. So they can have a very profound effect on the movements that we do and on our well-being. But as always, I would emphasize this is not a question of mind over matter. We can sometimes get the impression with arts like Tai Chi that it's all about how you think. And then we start to feel bad because we're not thinking right, because if we were thinking right, everything would be wonderful. If only life were that simple. There's all sorts of barriers, all sorts of problems that we might encounter. So this isn't offering a kind of panacea and saying all you've got to do is get your mind in the right place and everything will be fine. Life, as I say, is not that simple. But it's about taking ownership of that way that we respond. We are responding all the time. If you flick through a magazine, you come across a photograph of, I don't know, some food or something like that, you can start to feel hungry. But we can make active use of that. But it's not as simple as saying it's all in the mind. We encounter very real physical problems as well. So perhaps it's more about how we respond to those problems than it is sort of like as actually dealing with them. But there is potential there for helping ourselves. Now go back to this little rocking movement and then turn it into the circular movement that we did earlier. When you do this, it's important not to go too far. This is about as far as I can get my head to move out to the side. If I go any further, what I'm doing now, I've got a straining movement there and there. And if I push against that, sooner or later, I will fall out the chair. But it doesn't have to be a big movement. Now, if you hold one hand in front of you, just hold it in position, but it will follow the movement. So what you get is this beginning of a circular movement, almost like you're rolling a ball around. And to begin with, you just keep the hand in one position so you can feel the effect that the movement in your body is having down through your arm and into your fingers. And then when you've got a sense for that, you can begin to make the movement a little bit bigger. Just let your arm extend out as you go forwards. And then come back in as you go back. So you get this nice, smooth, fluid movement. Feeling the combination of your weight moving, the turning in your hips and waist, guiding your hand. So if you turn the other way, the hand will follow. So think back to fisherman cast a net, where the weight moved, the body moved, the hands followed. It's the same idea, except now you're trying to get this horizontal circle. And then try that with your other hand. So it doesn't matter which way you go, first of all. Just feel the connection, feet to hips, to shoulders, to elbows, to wrists, and to fingers. Spread your fingers out a little bit. Be aware of the spaces between your fingers, so you're not holding your hands tight. Stiffness, tightening anywhere in your body will lay across that line of movement that I described, feet to hips and so on and so forth. A bit like if you've got a musical instrument like a guitar or a violin, and you're playing it, and then somebody puts their finger on the string, it blocks the vibration, it blocks the sound. Go back the other way, just letting your arm go out a little bit, so your elbow gets a little bit straighter and then bends again. And then both hands together. When it's done with both hands like this, one of the names for it is polishing the table. I'm never entirely sure whether housework is a positive image or not, to be honest, but there you go. Nice and smooth. Then go back in the other direction. So as we go forwards, our arms extend out, and as we go back, they draw back in. I'm going to change that slightly. Just let one arm go out and turn, sweep the hand back. As it comes in, you're going to turn back the other way and bring the other arm back. So now we're alternating from side to side, left to right. The weight comes back to the middle, you go forward, you sweep around. Just letting your arms follow. So a little bit more complicated, a little bit more imperative to bring your attention to the center of your body, your feet and your legs. Exercise referred to as stirring the beans. Notice how the rhythm of the movement, the pattern, always brings you back to this central position. Just to touch base in that way. Let's do one more on each side. And come back. So once again, we come back into our center. All of the movements in Tai Chi will have that built in to the pattern, built into the rhythm. If you think about when we do this, we push out, we come back. We expand out, contract back, and so on and so forth. So this is yang to yin to yang. It's there in all of the movements. Going back to something I mentioned at the start of the class, this idea of centering, or coming back to that space, that quietness, that stillness. The movement should actually encourage that. I remember I used to teach in a centre for people recovering from head injuries, and there was one guy who came to a few sessions, and one of his symptoms of his head injury was that he would get panic attacks very easily. And he said he was down in the centre of town, at the bus station in the centre of town one Saturday, and he felt a panic attack coming on. And he said, it was interesting, it was lovely what he said. He made a point of coming up to me and telling me that he could feel the panic attack coming on, but he actually remembered how he'd felt in the Tai Chi. And so what he did was he went and found a bench in the park behind the bus station and just sat down and settled down and did some breathing and so on and so forth. And he said that the panic attack just went away. And it's a really good example, both of what I was talking about, memory, remembering how it felt in the Tai Chi, but also remembering in the sense that, you know, that there are other ways of doing things. There are other states that we can access. That idea of coming back to the centre. It was very interesting, very moving to hear him say that. So let's just go into the standing, rubbing your hands together. So that's the kind of thing that happens as you get more familiar with not just the movements, but the underlying dynamic of them. Tapping over your face. Over your head and neck. Down to one shoulder. And jaw. Side. Upper part of your chest. And then your legs. We want that process of centering or rooting, however you think of it, to become part of just how we do things. So when you stand, don't just stand and think, well, I've got to do the exercises. Stand and think about the standing position that you're in for a moment. I suppose, once again, taking time to stand and stare, to think about where your feet are, your weight, your shoulders, and so on and so forth. You're giving yourself a few moments for that settling in. So just take a couple of slow, gentle breaths. Let your hips drop back. And then sinking down a little bit further. And here we feel that sense of lifting and pulling down. A bit more obvious, the role of our hips, our legs, and that sense of extension and contraction, particularly through our back. Get myself in the right position so you can see. So there, I push up, the body expands, and then contracts. and then wild goose, and part in the clouds. Lovely. And then just give your legs a little shake. And put 1 foot forwards. So there's a very practical element to this standing and staring, I think. In the story I just told you, the guy having a panic attack, we see one element of it. Here, it's really worth taking the time. You go forward, rather than just forwards, backwards, go forwards and give yourself just a moment to rest in this position. Remember, you're training yourself to notice small details, to have that kind of quietness in your mind that allows that sort of attentiveness. Make use of it. Can you really transfer your weight and feel as though you're settling into the foot? Lots can go wrong. You might find yourself out here or out here. We all do. So this isn't a question of getting it right all the time, if ever, in my case. But it's a question, I can get to here and it feels wrong. And say, okay, I'll just take a moment to settle and so on and so forth. So we're actually applying these, if you like, these skills that we picked up to something really crucial for our well-being, which is our mobility. And we want those kind of adjustments to become part of how we move. If you're walking down the road and the wind blows and your hair blows in front of your eyes, rush out of your eyes, you won't even have to think about it. If you're walking down the road and you're slightly offline, you want these adjustments to take place because you've trained them, you've hardwired those processes into your nervous system as much as anything else. Then just raising your toes and your heel. So a little bit more of your weight going in. And then, as and when you're ready, we add the step. And on the other side, single side it was then, transferring your weight, just with that slight pause. It's a difficult thing to do. So much in our lives, our culture is rushed. We're expected to do everything at once, more than one thing at once. And we don't place a high value on just being, just staring. If you went out into your garden and just stood there, staring at the garden, perhaps enjoying the breeze, enjoying the flowers, and so on and so forth, chances are somebody who knew you would come along and say, "Are you okay?" Because it's quite a strange thing to do, isn't it? And yet there's many sort of benefits to it. So it's quite difficult. There's always, I've got to move, I've got to do this, I've got to do that. Give yourself time, especially as you go into the stepping. This is not a competition. This is not a race. And be aware that this is quite difficult. And it can be as informative to find that you can't do this as to find that you can. This is not about whether you can slowly lift your leg up. It's about what you're learning through the process of the exercise. When and if you're ready, stepping in. It's also not about stopping the wobbling around. Because sometimes we wobble, don't we? So it can be quite useful to, I'm wobbling around. Can you, once again, get that sense of coming back? It's perhaps more important than never wobbling while you do this exercise. Have your left foot, well, your other foot forwards, and let's just do a few rounds of push and cast the net. And interestingly, when we do this exercise properly, it's in that moment when we settle into the leg, when we stop eventually, that the arms swing out more. And the same thing as we go back. It's not the arms leading, the arms will swing past as we come slowly to a halt. And then on the other side. One more time. And go back to your chairs. Before we finish, just to remind you that there is I have put some film and things up on YouTube. There's a YouTube channel as they're referred to. Like for instance, I've recorded this session. You'll only see me in the recording, but once in a couple of hours it should be up there on YouTube. So if you wanted to go over things again, there's other stuff up there. There's also some short pieces I'm starting to build up. So if you're interested, if you want to have a look, if you look on the email that I send out, the email bulletin, there's a link there to take you to the channel. Or if you've got chat facility, I think most of us would have. If you go to either the top or bottom of your screen, you'll see that there's a label chat. If you press that, you'll see that I've entered the link, and you should be able to copy that and keep it on your computer or on your iPad or whatever. But that link should take you to the channel as well. So, you know, if you're looking to be able to think, oh, wouldn't mind doing that again, or that was a good class, or that was rubbish, I'll see if I can find something else, or whatever, then do have a little look at the YouTube channel. If you have trouble getting into it, drop me an email and I'll send you the link again. But now this idea of coming back. This is a theme that comes up again and again in Tai Chi. Another student of mine from long ago, she came to, I was persuaded to do a series of workshops out in Bottisham, in fact. She came to the first one, and when she came back to the second one, she told me that she had some kind of executive job. This is years ago, many years ago, long before mobile phones or anything. And anyway, she was on her way to a conference to give a presentation at the conference. She got stuck in traffic, which is familiar enough to most of us, I would imagine. And of course, that's a terrible situation because you're stuck, aren't you? And you know you're going to be late, and you start to panic and sweat and so on and so forth. And she said she got to the conference hall eventually, parked the car, leapt out the car, kind of ran into the building. And just before she went into the hall, she said she suddenly remembered how she'd felt on the Tai Chi day. And so she sat down and just thought to herself, rather than dash in there, she just sat down, relaxed a little bit, again, did some breathing. And when she'd done that for a couple of minutes, she got up, walked into the hall. She said, I was still late, she said, but I felt much better about it. Breathed into the hall, went up to the podium, took her place and said, sorry, I'm late, but I got stuck in traffic. No problem. Everybody understands. So she felt much better about the situation. So another example of that kind of memory and how powerful, how useful at all that can actually be. So for Embrace Tiger, Return to Mountain, the emphasis on the return. You push your arms up, and even as you do this, you can feel the pull of gravity running down through your body, and you just allow it to draw you down, like having a jar of muddy water and just watching the mud settle and the water clear. And that settling, that clearing, such a valuable tool in our culture. Embrace Tiger, Return to Mountain. One more round. And rest. Lovely. Thank you very much, everybody. So see if you can find the chat thing if you're interested in the YouTube video. If you have any questions, do feel free to unmute yourself and ask at this point. So.
No questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. So take care then, everybody.
Have a good week.
Yes, you too.
Yes, take care.
Isn't there? If that means anything at the moment. So.